Wow, we are so excited to feature our first keynote of the summit with none other than Will Page and Ralph Simon. So Will Page is the author of Tarzan Economics, 8 Principles in Pivoting Through Disruption, and he's also the former chief economist of Spotify and PRS for Music. And of course, Mr. Ralph Simon, music industry executive, founder and CEO of Mobilium Global, co-founder of Zumba and Jive Records. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. I've kind of asked you to just come on board and discuss trends and topics and the future of our industry. And of course, I know you guys want to have some questions, so we have made sure we have reserved some time for questions. So to our viewers, any questions you have, feel free to ask those in the chat, and I'll make sure that Will and Ralph receive those. So gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much too, and thank you, Ralph, for being here to help moderate my way through and translate my Scottish accent. So I apologize to anyone who struggles with the accent, but there are subtitles available after the show. So let's take you through the material we've got. The first thing that we want to stress is this is your time, not mine. So the faster we get to Q&A, the better. But I'm going to take 15, 20 minutes of the clock to walk you through 4 themes that are relevant to music education across the United States, based loosely around my book as well. So I think the first thing to do is introduce myself. Kindly announced earlier, Chief Economist of Spotify and PRS for Music. That gives me experience in rights holders and rights users, which is quite unique. Author of my first book, Tarzan Economics, which is published by Little Brown in the US and is on Audible as well. And then I want to stress, I believe Larry Miller is in this audience today, but one of the best things about my work is every January, the students of New York University's Global Music Management class comes to London. I get heavily involved there in arranging for keynote speakers such as Martin Mills, visits to London's sort of music tech companies, and also teaching them myself. And on every occasion, they take me out for drinks afterwards, and going out drinking with students from New York University reminds me that I'm clearly very, very old. I just can't keep pace with them as well. To my right, your left, I have Ralph Simon. Ralph, a few words from yourself.
Great to be here, of course. Just seeing the manner in which Will has been able to really analyze and articulate the new imperatives in the global music industry, and particularly with the way that streaming has really influenced and made open a whole new range of opportunity for music creators, for music educators, and also, more importantly, to see the globalization and the world platforms that now exist for music and music makers.
Fantastic. So with Ralph's guidance, we're just going to go through these 4 chapters to our presentation. I want to introduce my work. Like, what on earth does an economist do in the music industry? I got lucky. I had 2 passions, well, 3 passions, Kronenberg Lager, but 2 main passions, which was music and economics. And I got to fuse them. So I want to explain to you what a rockonomist does. Then I want to get straight into the book, a whirlwind story of what happened to music over the past 20 years. Music is interesting because it was the first to suffer and the first to recover from digital disruption. Now we're all staring at our naps at the moment. Thirdly, I want to turn to chapter 2 of the book, which is called Paying Attention. Just stop there for a second. Paying is what we say in English. If you look at French, Spanish, or Swedish, it's offer, share, or give attention. But we use a currency language of paying attention. I really do believe that attention economics is a fundamental part of how you want to navigate disruption, how you want to design a curriculum, how you want to approach innovation. Then lastly, I want to turn to how music's being taught today and look at the work that I've done on music copyright, especially music copyright, all of its value, labels, publishers, collecting societies, and show some of the important trends that's been happening there. That'll be 16, 18 minutes tops, and then it's all yours for Q&A. And please squeeze us like a sponge while we're on this call for intel. So what does a rockonomist do? What I'm going to do here is just tell you a very quick anecdote from my childhood. I'm going to be very open and transparent with this audience. Room full of strangers, so hopefully I can turn them into friends, but explain to you what an economist does, which is to help you think differently from a lawyer, differently from an accountant, differently from a marketing executive. And this story goes way back to when I was 11 years old on this beach in Scotland called Pease Bay. Further down the coastline, you can see England. We're on the east coast of Scotland here, just north of the English border. And I was on the beach with my dad, who taught economics at school. And I remember being jealous of my older brother because he had learned what economics was, and I wanted to catch up. So I said, Dad, teach me what economics is. So he gave me a scenario. I'll play with Ralph here for a second. He said to me, okay, Ralph, you're the Prime Minister of this country, and I'm going to tell you now that last year, 24 British kids drowned swimming in British beaches, which is a tragedy. And as the Prime Minister of this country, with this terrible news of British kids drowning in British beaches, you walk out of number 10 Downing Street and you address the grieving parents, the hostile press, and the politicians in the face, and you have to come up with a reaction, an answer to what you're going to do about this problem. Now, this all sounds a bit strange to start off a presentation, but bear with me. I was 11, but Ralph, any ideas what you would do in that situation?
Well, being in Scotland, I would obviously see a geographic differential between the UK and Scotland. It would be like someone saying, if I was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I was getting this problem that was given to me by someone from New York or from Los Angeles, how would I deal with it? So clearly there are geographic factors, but it's an interesting and challenging kind of address.
So my solution as an 11-year-old laddie in Scotland was to make swimming compulsory. I thought that was a good idea. Kids are drowning. I want to stop them drowning. Make swimming compulsory. You stop them from drowning. Job done. So then my dad took me aside and said, that's politics. That's a knee-jerk reaction. Let's do some economics. What do we know about what happened, son? Dad, kids drowning. That makes me sad. Where were they, son? They were at the beach, Dad, right here in front of you. What were they doing at the beach, son? They were swimming, Dad. What does that tell you about their ability to swim or not? That meant they could swim. Why? Because kids who can't swim don't go into water. And that's when the penny dropped for me as an 11-year-old of that's what economics is. Had I made swimming compulsory, we would have had more kids in that water and therefore potentially more deaths as a result. So my best intentions would have made the problem worse. And you only have to think about policy responses to the pandemic to see the relevance of this year. So that's when I got interested in economics. Dad, what is the solution? Information. How about a flag system alerting swimmers to when the current is unsafe? How about regulation telling parents where their kids can go safely swimming? But making swimming compulsory was not the solution. In fact, it was part of the problem. We needed a different way of thinking. Just to cap that story off before we move on, when I first moved to London to become the chief economist of the PRS, the equivalent of ASCAP of EMI in America, the general counsel of the PRS asked me the same question, Debbie Stones. She put down a knife and fork and said, Will, what made you become an economist? And I told her the same story. She looked a bit baffled. She said, really? I'd have just banned the kids from swimming. And I think there you can see the difference between law on one side, where it's all black and white, and economics on the other, which is a whole ton of grey. So as Barry McCarthy said at Spotify, my job is to help you see around corners, to think differently from the rest of the people in the company. That's what an economist brings. So let's put that into practice and look at what Tarzan Economics brings. This incredible story of 20 years of first to suffer, first to recover of digital disruption. And if we go back 20 years, it's hilarious to think that we used to sell these things, CDs, in cardboard boxes by weight of pellet. And this is a true story. I got this confirmed. Our Price, a record shop here in the UK, would buy and sell CDs by the weight of pellet. I would say to Ralph, I've got a pellet of CDs here. And Ralph wouldn't say to me, what's inside? He'd say, how much does it weigh? I don't know, Ralph, about 30 kilos. I'll give you this much for them. How much data science is wrapped up in a pallet of CDs, okay? There's no Google BigQuery dashboards to be built here. That was then, this is now. Now, as everyone knows, along came these sites, and this is a law-abiding audience, so I'm going to assume that nobody knows what these sites are, but Kazaa, the Pirate Bay, and especially U-Turn were some of the most powerful piracy apps known. And we had an entire business, and Ralph, you were there at the time, just being upended.
Right, completely.
Copyright stands for the right to control copying. That right got lost when Napster, Kazaa, and U-Turn came along. But if I'm picking on these three sites, I know there's many others, there's a reason for this, which they all happen to be Swedish. Sweden was the birthplace of piracy in many ways. And what's interesting when we turn to Spotify stories, it was the same engineers who built these piracy sites, particularly uTorrent, that went on to build Spotify. And to credit to Daniel Eck's vision, he knew that if you built something that was better than stealing, people would come. You can try and soothe the problem out of existence. You can try and ban the kids from swimming, but that's not going to work. You need to make legal music superior to illegal music, and they will come. And he came up with the site Spotify, the most powerful piracy app in the world, and then said, I'm going to go to Universal and get a license for it. And everybody thought he was daft. Now, how do you persuade people to come? I think you make accessing music more efficient on a legal service than it is stealing from an illegal service. And this is the speed to which you access music on Spotify. The engineer who built the play button that many of you press every day went to the University of Stockholm psychology department and asked the professor, what in metric terms does instant mean? And the professor said, oh, that's obvious. It's 250 milliseconds. At that point, the brain cannot see delay. So then this engineer goes into a cave, eats cold pizza, drinks flat Coca-Cola, and codes the play button that we know and love today, which plays 285 milliseconds after you press play. What that then does is it makes it feel like you're carrying around in your pocket 73.6 million unique songs. That's the definition of instant. And my challenge to the people in this room is try stealing music faster than that. And that's why in March of this year, the music industry announced there's 500 million people paying for a music streaming service, where it's always voluntary to pay. Ralph, you could stop subscribing to your music service today and continue enjoying music for the rest of your life.
Right.
You don't need to pay. It's voluntary to pay. But we have 500 million people on this planet now paying for music. It's an incredible story, especially if you look at other sectors like newspapers who have struggled to get a tiny fraction of that volume. Just bringing Spotify's journey to a close, in April 2018, Spotify went public through a direct listing on the New York Stock Exchange. This was our big day. And no disrespect to the Americans on this call, but your New York Stock Exchange flew the wrong flag outside the building. That flag on the right-hand side is not a Swedish flag, that is a Swiss flag. And hilariously, I was with Daniel when we had to alert them to this. The apology said, hey, Spotify, everyone makes mistakes, and let's face it, Switzerland's got great chocolates. But
oh my goodness.
After 10, 12 years of blood, sweat, and tears, that was our big day going live on the New York Stock Exchange. An incredible tech unicorn story from Europe going public on the New York Stock Exchange as well.
Amazing achievement.
That's our story of Tarzan economics. These are the other 7 stories in the book, 7 principles, 7 lectures, and I'd love to come to America to give these lectures on any of these topics. You know, Make or Buy is a great chapter. I got to sit with the band Radiohead to tell for the first time the story of In Rainbows and what that means to today's world of Patreon and Kickstarter and Substack. But what that means in terms of history, Charles Dickens never sold a book. He sold books by the installment. He had a very different distribution model. So as you go through these chapters, you begin to learn about how these principles in disruption can be transferred to other industries. And I think from an educational perspective, that's what makes music so fascinating. Music matters because it got there first. Now everyone is looking at my work, at your departments across universities, saying, what can I learn from this journey?
That's right. So important that the education that all of you that are watching bring to your students and bring to your classes is absolutely vital for the wider understanding of the digital universe.
Absolutely. I can just pick up on that. I mentioned newspapers earlier. Ralph, it's interesting to see that train stations today are being built without a newsagent. Since the time of the Victorians, train stations and newsagents went hand in hand.
Right.
You're going to sit still on a train, you got to buy something to read. We don't buy things to read anymore. We look at our phones.
Right.
Let me quickly turn to attention economics, the chapter 2 of the book, and just give you an insight into how I cover these principles. I'm going to begin by just telling a very brief backstory, a piece I wrote in Billboard in 2017, a long time ago, where I was arguing that Spotify doesn't compete with Apple Music, and Katy Perry doesn't compete with Taylor Swift. And Apple Music doesn't compete with Spotify, and Universal doesn't compete with Sony. We compete with Netflix. And if I binge watch 6 episodes of House of Cards on Netflix without sleep, that's 6 hours that Netflix wins, that everyone else loses, meaning everyone else has less time to compete for. That's attention economics. Impose a constraint and look at who's gain and who gets the pain from that battle for our scarce attention. And Netflix's response to my article was that sleep is our biggest form of competition. Well, I took great joy in reminding Reed Hastings that Spotify has sleep music playlists as well. So we can compete when you're sleeping. Now, In this attention economics world, two weird things have happened. I'm going to quickly explain what's happening here with attention and music. And what I want you to think about is that expression, there's no show without business, there's no business without a show. Does the tail wag the dog, essentially? But here's weird thing number one. We are seeing clear evidence that songs are getting shorter, and the hits are getting particularly short. It is not uncommon for hits to be done under 3 minutes. In fact, quite a few hits are done under 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Lil Nas X Old Town Road fades out after 2 minutes and 8 seconds. And if you dump TikTok on top of this, maybe we're talking about 34 seconds.
Why is that?
Well, we're going to come to the reason why in a second, but I do think the attention spans of today's millennials has a lot to answer for.
Right.
If they're used to swiping after 30 seconds, don't ask them to stick around for another 30 more. It's a very fickle attention span. Here's weird thing number two, which is the way that we write our songs today is changing. And I wrote this piece for The Economist to show that now, more than ever before, songs begin with a chorus. Now, Ralph, you know Carole King personally. And I remember when Carole King was in the Brill building, there was a sign above the door which said, "Don't bore us, get us to the chorus." What we're learning today is that people are writing songs that begin with the chorus. So let's think about this. I've got a picture of U2 here, Bono. Quick joke, what's the difference between God and Bono? God doesn't think he's Bono. But with Bono, if you think about my favorite U2 songs, Where the Streets Have No Name, Ralph, it takes 2 minutes and 8 seconds before Bono's voice comes in on that anthem.
Right, definitely.
Do you think a Gen Z millennial is going to hang around for 2 minutes and 8 seconds for the voice to come in on the track?
No, absolutely not. That just is not the way that people really consume their streaming entertainment.
So we're seeing the songwriting change for the business, but there's economics that students need to be aware of, and I want this to be taught in universities, which is the tail that is wagging the dog. Let's just do two rules. Firstly, in streaming, you only get paid if you've been played for 30 uninterrupted seconds. So it makes perfect sense to shove the chorus up front, to hook you in so you don't skip that track.
Exactly.
Secondly, you don't get paid a penny more for lasting a second more. So if you're canny, why write longer songs? And you can see Drake's album has 26 songs. Some are 42-second skits. For classical music, this is a problem. But for pop music, the solution is write shorter songs and shove the chorus up front. At this point, a lot of people in this virtual audience will be saying, "Oh my God, what is business doing to culture? This is terrible." Now, a key point in my book is we've been here before, we'll be here again. If I turn to this fine fellow, which, just for full disclosure, neither of us have done business with, this is a man who ran the Mafia during the 50s and 60s. The Mafia used to run the jukeboxes in America, and they would demand that all songs last 2 minutes, 30 seconds, not a second more. And the reason was to extract the maximum value out of the jukebox. What is a jukebox? A way for paying for on-demand music. What is Spotify? A way for paying for on-demand music. So this anomaly of shorter songs, chorus up the front, is a little bit worrying. It does make you feel a little bit uncertain about disruption, but these historical lessons, which are throughout the book, really remind us we've been here before and we'll be here again. So that's my primer on attention economics. Key thing is it's scarce. If it's scarce, it's contestable. If it's contestable, who are your friends and who are your foes in this battle for attention? Last thing, music copyright. Two observations here. On the micro side, I just want to make it clear how music is priced. And I use this chart from my book called The Hierarchy of Exploitation to basically say that the per stream value of a song is low if it's linear or passive consumption. Ralph listens to the radio, doesn't control the radio, doesn't choose what the radio is going to play in, and high if it's exhausting the intellectual property in a purchase of a CD or a download. But in between, you have all these variations of pure webcast or interactive webcast or on-demand streaming. Very briefly, in America, you have Pandora. That would be an example of interactive webcast. And you also have Spotify, an example of an on-demand stream. The point of this hierarchy, as laid down by the UK Copyright Tribunal in 2006, is this is why Spotify pays more than Pandora. And it's also why Pandora pays less than Spotify, because you're leaning in more. Therefore, you should get paid more as a result. This is the rationale for music licensing, and it often gets lost in the literature. So I just think it's a good refresher. A second microeconomic observation about the music industry comes from these two charts here. On the left is US music buyers and their average spend. On the right is US music subscribers and their average spend. And the observation here is pretty obvious and intuitive, but just to recap, what I'm trying to encourage students and university to do is to teach average revenue per user or average revenue per buyer. Now, what you can see in America is the bars are going down, so there's fewer and fewer millions of Americans buying CDs and downloads, and the line is going down, which means they're spending less and less. So we have a less and less effect on the business of ownership, CDs and downloads. Fewer people spending less money. On the right, you can see the bars are going up, and the line, broadly speaking, is going up, which means more of more. There's more consumers spending more on music streaming. And it's this concept called RPU, which I think helps students appreciate how we get from there, the first 10 years of disruption, praying that kids were going to go back to buying CDs and downloads, to here, how we get to next, which is how do we price up access and all-you-can-eat bundle.
So when you mention ARPU, that's average
revenue
per user.
Yeah. And the nuance here is average revenue per actual buyer. One of the biggest anomalies around the time of Spotify launching in America was the vast majority of the American population didn't buy anything at all.
Really?
You cannot cannibalize zero, was a big mantra of the licensing team back then. Leaving those two fairly hefty microeconomic concepts, I just wanted to close the presentation off with some macroeconomics. For 7 years now, I have published a paper called The Global Value of Music Copyright, where I add together the IFPI yearbook, record labels. I add on top of that the CZAC Global Collection Report, collecting CDs, and I also add on top of that publisher payments, so grand rights, sync licensing that they collect directly. And I give the industry a figure they can work with to say, that's what this C with the circle is worth. I don't want people saying the IFPI said the business is worth 20 billion. I want them to say it's music is worth 30 billion when you factor in all the rights. If you're a singer-songwriter, Ralph, all these copyrights are relevant to your business, not just some.
Totally right.
So I think it's a valuable part of the business, but I do want to zero in on one of the stories here. We know that the copyright business is worth 32.5 billion in 2020. We know it's going to be a lot bigger when I do this work in October this year. But if you look at how the splits have changed, it's kind of interesting to think that when I first did it, copyright was split evenly between records and labels and artists on one side, getting 51%, and publishers, songwriters and collecting societies on the other side, getting just under 50%. But today we've seen that change. So now labels are seeing 2/3 and publishers are seeing 1/3. So you think about $1 coming into the business for music. Before we get into the legal jargon, $1 comes in. Who gets what share is a question we're asking. And if you're investing in copyrights and if you're teaching about investing in music catalogs in your courses, that's a crucial question. Do you want to buy publishing catalogs or master right catalogs? Another extension to this is to look at the work that I did recently for Spotify's Loud and Clear website, where I was able to show over time, publishers are seeing more money in red on the chart on the left here from streaming than they ever did from sales of CDs or downloads. So the revenue share that publishers are achieving from this market, from consumer revenues, has improved. So the consumers are spending more money, and publishers are getting a bigger share for it. And then the chart on the right there, I was able to also show that if you go back to 2001 and recalculate the copyright value, it was around about $28.3 billion, which publishers got less than a quarter. And to reiterate, today, we're at $32.5 billion, and publishers are seeing just over 1/3, which means they're seeing a bigger share, a bigger pie. Now, all of this type of analysis can be contested, discussed, debated, disputed, but I'm using official stats yearbooks to compose the figure and to present to the industry the broader shape of this industry. Again, I want to stress this, not just one yearbook or two yearbooks or having a look at a third yearbook, put them all together, rip out all the double counting, perform all the technical adjustments, take a lot of paracetamol, lie down in a dark room and give the industry the global value of music copyright so we can have a proper discussion about how much this business is worth. Crucial for education, crucial for lobbying as well, to go up onto Capitol Hill and say, I represent a business that's worth $32.5 billion is way more impressive than saying I represent a business that's only worth 20. Let me close off the presentation and come off screen share. I can bring any of these slides up here, but just to recap, what does economics do from that story in the beach? It helps you see around corners, helps you see things that you can't currently see by applying a legal or an accountancy framework to the market. to the nature of the book. How do you let go of the old Vine? How did music manage to let go of CDs and downloads and embrace new Vine? Well, I think the truth of the matter was CDs and downloads were dying anyway, so we had to let go of that model before it let go of ourselves. Third point on attention is only 24 hours a day, so the scarcity of attention drives its contestability. When Netflix wins an hour, everybody else loses that hour. So we're in competition with Netflix, we're not in competition with ourselves. Then finally, that point about a fair division between labels and publishers. I know there's a CRB coming up in America soon. There's all sorts of policy debates here, but I think that work serves a purpose for professionals and for students to start thinking about what is the right allocation of a dollar that's awarded to music. How much should go to the label side? How much should go to the publisher side? And there's a very active debate here in the UK, where we now have a UK inquiry and prospect of regulation coming into the business as well. So thank you guys for your time. Looking forward to questions, and I would love to learn more about where the audience is from, and when I'm back in the States to look at options of coming to lecture your students as well. But let me go back to Ralph and our moderator for Q&A.
Well, Will, first of all, thanks very much for giving that outline. It's just fascinating to see that when you hear the industry, that's the music industry, all aspects of it, live entertainment, music publishing, the recording industry, the artists' income industries. We are living in an era where the business is doing really incredibly well, and never before has as much money been spent on music, not only in the major countries in the world, say the top 6 countries in music, but all around the world, where we are seeing, for example, artists from the United States and Canada and the major markets. Sweden is an important music market. The UK, which just came second in the Eurovision Song Contest 2 nights ago. But obviously, the pie is now much, much bigger. And this makes me ask all of you educators that are on this particular talk by Will, how, with all of these changes and fast-moving changes, does an educator keep a curriculum to be current? Will, what do you say to that?
It's definitely a challenge, because you have to write your curriculum with maybe a year or 2 years lead time. And my worry is next year's curriculum is already out of date. So, for example, if you were learning data science on a course in the United States and you were learning how to use SQL, well, most of your potential employers have left SQL and moved on to Google BigQuery. That'd be an example of great tool, but it's a wrong tool for today's job. So I think that's the challenge that you have. And I'd like to see, I think, more participation with the actual industry professionals. When I've watched Larry Miller drive that course at New York University forward, it's really encouraging to see that when they come to London, they're on the front line, meeting labels, meeting executives, saying, what tools do I need when I graduate with this ticket to ride, and I want to get back into the job market and pursue my career? So I think the key thing is just do not allow your course to be siloed into its own little cul-de-sac. Do what Larry's doing in New York, get it out there into the front line, participate with the industry, and try and ask the question to the industry. If you're hiring this student in 24 months' time, what tools would you need? And like you say, Ralph, it's all about what's happening next. It always has been. And that's the question I think the universities need to be asking today.
So in terms of a curriculum and looking at what should be taught in terms of music education, obviously there's got to be a bias, or at least some emphasis on streaming. What streaming brings, the way that streaming will also allow for the discovery of new music, which in turn opens up new vistas for music creation that perhaps might not have been as popular 12 months ago or 6 months ago. And I was just thinking, for example, the big, incredible reviews just this week of the new Kendrick Lamar album, which has been so rapturously received, 5 stars. And of course, when somebody like Drake sees those great reviews for Kendrick Lamar, he's probably thinking, wow, I've now got to come up with something that's even stronger. How do you think educators can look at some elements like that to show their students some of these interesting other elements that play a part in the broader understanding?
Well, what I like about your question is the global element. I still think this industry thinks with borders. Ralph runs the UK division of a record label. I run the German division for a record label, and we meet once a year at our strategy offsite.
Right.
It's clear to me that the consumers don't think about borders, and the playlists don't think about borders. Right. Music is traveling like never before. So if that's how the consumers are thinking, and that's how the technology is working, I think the students of tomorrow need to be in line with that language as well. So if students at universities up and down America can be thinking beyond borders, beyond I want to work in the American music industry, knowing that track that you could put out could go viral in Latin America or in Southeast Asia tomorrow as well. I think that's a mindset thing, is how do we get rid of the borders in our business?
So this is more than just looking at the different aspects of music. For example, over the last 10, 12 years, rap has become such an incredible force all over the world. Mm-hmm. And there's even a differentiation in that understanding of rap, because whilst you might have some very big American rappers and their work, in France, it's the French rappers that are going to do well. In Holland, it's the Dutch rappers that'll do well, because there is a colloquial importance at a local level for people to do something in the language of that country.
Yeah, the penny drop for me was, I think 2018, we were looking at the top hip-hop artists in Holland. And the point here being that Holland was an early success story for Spotify. And we invested in local curation in Holland before anywhere else. So we supplied curators, and supply can affect demand. It's how you build the United States. You supply the train line and people demand houses. And we learned there that Drake was the number one artist around the world on Spotify.
Right.
Okay, obvious. But in Holland, he was the 8th biggest hip-hop artist. And the 7 above him were Dutch, rapping in Dutch. And that's when I realized how you can scale global but curate local. And that's something which I think, I'd hope that students today are well aware of, but I want to hammer that point home of just that balancing act. Again, getting rid of borders and thinking about the market in terms of, you're not releasing to a US market with US radio stations plugging you. You're releasing to a global platform, and you're one thumb press on a piece of glass away from hitting Jakarta, Indonesia, or Santiago, Chile. That's a real mindset thing.
So can you speak on this? Because I've noticed in some of the Spotify numbers that 2 countries in particular, Spain and Mexico, had a huge uplift in Spotify usage. What do you think made those 2 countries suddenly jive in, and basically see that incredible magnetism of streaming?
Well, I go back to the earlier slide of Daniel's vision, build something that's better than stealing and people will come.
Right.
Spain and Mexico had a huge piracy problem. There's a joke that copyright in Spain stands for the right to copy. And in Mexico, there was literally there was lobby groups protecting the CD bootleg business, saying, hey, you've got to stop these piracy sites because they're removing demand from the CDs out the back of my white van. But I think convenience won. And I think the other thing that you've seen, which is very interesting, going back to, playlists without borders, the success of Spotify and streaming more generally, YouTube especially in Latin America, has actually made it quite hard for the country of Spain to break Spanish acts.
Correct.
Spanish language music is dominating the charts like never before, but Spanish acts are suffering because of the overwhelming success of streaming in Latin America. And that's an example. If that was a student, for me, that's a PhD or a master's thesis topic right there, which is the impact of globalization and streaming.
Right.
We've got one question up here, and we're going to take questions from the chat bar as well. Ralph has a few more, but here's one, which is, question for one is, any idea if when we'll see a shift towards a user-centric model as opposed to a pro-rata model? Absolutely. Okay, so I'll take this one. So for anyone who's not aware of this debate that's been going on, let's just build it up. Like I'm lecturing out students in a room, assume no prior knowledge and build it up from basics. First point is, the current model is really simple. If Ralph gets 1% of all the streams that happened in Britain during last month, Ralph will see 1% of all the revenues generated in Britain last month. We're pooling all the money together for one country for one period, and we're pooling all the data together for one country, one period, and we allocate on a pro rata basis. There is a counter argument to this, which is perhaps my $10 a month should go to just my music, and Ralph's $10 a month should go to just his music. And this is a really beautiful debate. Firstly, the origins, the academic origins, are around fair division, a subject that's rarely taught in economics. Fair division, best way to teach it is, imagine there's a cake, same between myself and Ralph, and we're both looking hungry at this cake. What's the best way to divide a cake between 2 people? You give Ralph the knife, so he can cut himself a slice, but me the right to choose. Wait a second, Ralph has to cut this cake evenly because he doesn't control the choice. That is the origins of the academics of fair division. You add a third person, it gets more complicated. You deal with preference, envy, and then the maths begins to follow. So that's the origins of this debate, which is what's a fair division of the allocation of a fixed pot of cash? One academic paper and then one suggestion. The academic paper is by myself and David Safier, a wonderful man, and a walking encyclopedia on this topic. It's called Money In, Money Out, and it's published by Cerci. So Google will find that, SERCI, and I'll make sure this is all shared with people. And the second observation is that SoundCloud actually have the user-centric model in place with their fan-powered royalties. Now, what's interesting with SoundCloud is it's a hybrid model. There's the original SoundCloud pro rata model, but then if you're a super fan, you can enter a fan club for your artist and go down the fan-powered royalties model. So it's a hybrid model. Interesting, we have a year of data to work through and learn from, so it's a real-time case study. Students, I think, should be knocking on the door of SoundCloud saying, can I study this and report back? What's also interesting is it's a hybrid distribution model. And why I find that fascinating is because ASCAP has always had two distribution pots. One for classical music, which gets distributed this way, and another for everything else which isn't classical music, which gets distributed that way. So back to a theme in my book, history repeats itself. What SoundCloud is doing today is not that dissimilar from what ASCAP have been doing for the past 100 years. So hopefully that will help that question out as well. So we have a real life example in play, and the best thing we can do now is learn from the data. Do we have any more questions coming through in the chat bar at all?
Yes, let's see some, because it's a great opportunity to really tap into Will's deep pool of knowledge. And in fact, whilst we're waiting for a couple more questions to come in, Will, I've got a question for you that's particularly directed to the educators, and we obviously have many on this particular session. What do you think, or can you give any kind of advice or any kind of input on what makes cross-disciplinary education work? That is to say, you are having in today's complex world of music, music rights, and music distribution, different elements that each carry their own kind of weight.
Yeah, this is one of my biggest worries for music education today globally, which is if I go back home to Edinburgh, it was clear to me that the music department, which has a reputation, has no engagement at all with the business department.
Right.
And I don't want to pick winners here, but when I look at what Larry Miller's doing at New York University, I see it there. The courses are designed to merge, but you can't have one department having no interaction with another and claim those students are going to be prepared for working in the business or creating content in this business as well. So I think cross-disciplinary engagement is needed at an incredible scale now. I mean, coding needs to be taught in music schools.
Absolutely.
I think AI and machine learning needs to be taught in music schools. And if I was really, pushing the boat out here, I think gaming could potentially be taught in music schools as well. There's, so much engagement happening now between music and gaming. It's clear, go fishing where the fish are. That's where the fish are right now, is that crossroads between music and gaming. Yet I don't see the education institutions here preparing students for that crossroads.
Well, people look at Twitch certainly as an important gaming platform, but if you've got 3 billion people around the world that are playing games, and where music is now occupying more and more of an important element within the gaming fraternity and sororities, very, very important. I think we've got some more questions coming up. Well, let's just scroll up on that.
From Larry, question, how sustainable is today's historic high valuations? What direction do you think the multiples will move over the next few years? So thank you for this question on catalog valuations. A few remarks. Firstly, I'm very wary of trajectory logic. That is, you hold a ruler in a northeast gradient and say that's the way the market's going to go. And I think the last month has taught us a few lessons about that, especially for blockchain and a lot of tech stocks.
That's right, crypto particularly.
Come off a
real
cliff.
Crash.
Yeah, crypto claiming you can peg against the dollar. That's a trajectory logic right there.
Right.
I think that's also been applied to music. I really have a strong opinion about this. I don't think the next 10 years of music digital disruption is going to have much to do with the last 10 years. So if you thought Blondie was this valuable based on the last 10 years of data, that tells you nothing about what's going to happen in the next 10 years of data. I also think there is some clarity needed in terms of when we discuss valuations. If I am going to acquire Ralph's catalog with respect to the publisher's share, so a dollar comes in, the publisher's got a 20% share on that dollar, then I'm buying a multiple of the 20 cents. But we shouldn't compare that value that I'm paying is to a value where I buy all of Ralph's copyrights. So I'm not buying an extension to the house. Today, more likely, I'm buying the entire house. So I think there's some confusion there about how much these valuations are actually worth, because what we're buying is fundamentally different from what we've bought in the past. In the past, it was all about buying extensions to houses. Now we're buying the whole house. And that's a really interesting thing for myself. And then thirdly, for students, and let's just address the primary audience here, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of music catalog valuations that can be taught at universities. There's a huge opportunity there for case studies, for projects, for theses on this subject. And I would say, moreover than not, challenging the current valuation method. I would hire a student tomorrow at Spotify if they could show me why they thought these valuations were wrong. That's worth more to me than somebody saying, hey, I think what Wall Street is doing right now is right.
So here's an interesting thing. Just in the last few days, we've seen some examples of some great magical catalogs being put up for sale, most notably Pink Floyd and all of their work, obviously going back nearly half a century. But there's talk that Pink Floyd might be able to sell their recorded music catalog and their publishing catalog collectively for about $500 million, $500 million. Of course, Bruce Springsteen, who sold his publishing assets as well as his recorded masters for north of $500 million. We've got Paul Simon, who did the same with all of his work. Neil Young selling his publishing rights for about $150 million. And in fact, Hypnosis, the very, very go-ahead music publishing and acquisition company run by Merck Mercuriadis, who used to be one of the managers of Iron Maiden and then Elton John, just showing that songs as an asset class, that is to say, a song has now got the same similar kind of value that a diamond might have or a company might have. What do you think of that?
Almost like songs are the new gold.
Well, yeah.
It's encouraging that we're seeing this happen. I just want to reiterate that it's hard for me to say that what's happened to Pink Floyd's catalogue in the past is going to carry on that same trajectory in the future. Let's imagine, like, where was TikTok 3 years ago in music licensing? It didn't exist.
Right.
Now it's a top 5 account for most record labels. Is that really telling us what Pink Floyd are going to be worth the next 10 years? I think that's the thing, is that we're seeing a structural shift. We're seeing a post-Spotify economy emerge,
right,
but we're basing these valuations on a continuation of the Spotify economy going forward.
So is this because we're not seeing record sales in the way that they would have been during those glory golden years?
Yeah.
So, for example, a Pink Floyd that might have sold 80, 90 million copies of Dark Side of the Moon, if they look forward with their financial advisors to say, over the next 5 years, will Pink Floyd still sell the same volume? Probably not.
Yeah.
In terms of albums.
Yeah, I think it could be using yesterday's methodology for today's market, which
that's a good point.
For students is a huge opportunity to jump in and build something that's better. Now, we have another question here. Forbes recently reported that the human attention span decreases by 88% every year. Mathematically, I'm already confused. And it's now then less than 8 seconds, which is the attention span of a goldfish. Yet the average teenager gamer will play video games on average for 1.5 hours a day. How do you reconcile this discrepancy, and what does this mean for the music biz? Massive question. Thank you for this one. A few thoughts here. How we measure attention is tricky when you can multitask. So it's not binary. I can do X or Y. I could do X or Y together. Right. So we're late in the day here in the UK, so I can use an alcohol reference. A lot of what we're trying to do here is work out, in terms of attention, is it gin and tonic, complementary, or is it different brands of gin? That is, if I consume more fitness products, do I consume more music on Peloton? It would be gin and tonic.
Oh, that's a good question.
So, and that's when I said earlier about Netflix being a different brand of gin from consuming music. It's one or the other. If you're binging Netflix, there's nothing else to consume your time. The gaming point is interesting, and I'm very fond of saying this. Gaming does more revenue in 1 month now than music can do in an entire calendar year. And they only focus on engagement. Monetization is a function of engagement for the gaming business. So when Animal Crossing came out around the start of lockdown, April 2020, the average duration, the mean median mode of a person playing Animal Crossing was 9 hours.
Wow.
People were forgetting to eat. But then you have to say, well, if 9 hours goes to gaming, what's left for everyone else? So I think there's a lot that we can learn from gaming, but I think that the heart of this question here is, when we read these reports, is to take them with a pinch of salt but ask, in this battle for attention, where's my gin and tonic and where are my different brands of gin? Can gaming become an ally of music? Let me wrap up with this point here on this question. When we discuss podcasts, which is a fascinating space, I'd love to come back to this audience and bring some special guests from people who did the Joe Rogan deal at Spotify to educate this audience about podcasts. But think about this for a second. If I listen to Larry Miller's new track or Ralph Simon's new podcast, at the margin, what decision am I making? I'm making a decision to allocate 4 minutes of my time to Larry or 40 minutes of my time to Ralph. And if I pick Ralph, it doesn't give much time for Larry. And if I can consume 2 hours, 2.5 hours of audio content a day, which is broadly speaking the average, and a podcast lasts 40, 45 minutes, and I listen to 2 podcasts a day, you can see right there the challenge facing music. Now, what I want a student to be thinking is, how do I bring water to the horse? How do I put music into podcasts? It's a great way of taking attention economics and finding a solution through academia.
I love that. I love that you raised this whole issue of podcasts, because obviously the growth of podcasting, the people that are actually doing them, and the incredible pickup all around the world in the different subject areas, and music podcasts are a small component of the wider podcasting universe, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's just still not possible. If I want to do a podcast about my favorite band of all time, Talking Heads, I'm still not allowed to put my Talking Heads songs into a podcast.
Why is that?
Licensing.
Amazing.
So again, the students and the universities have a free hand to look at this problem, this dilemma, and say, well, we're not tied by industry politics. Can we find a solution here which brings, again, horse to water, water to horse, brings music copyright and puts it into that 40 minutes of attention that Ralph's going to allocate to his favorite podcast? Seems like a no-brainer to me, and hopefully that resonates with the audience as well. Armin, any questions from yourself, sir? You want to come on mic?
Sure thing. This has been incredibly fascinating. And Will, I might take you up on the offer of a special session just discussing podcasts, because that's like a whole new genre of music industry trade. I have a couple more questions I wanted to share with you from the audience. This one's for you, Will. You posit this in an era of opportunity to help consumers and listeners, and it sounds like a foundational or thinking skill set versus hard knowledge. What are some of the foundational skills that are needed or valued today, in your opinion?
So here's 2 industry words which may get lost in this audience: pipeline and dashboard. Pipeline you might think is something that's in the North Sea or in the Gulf of Mexico, and dashboard is something you might find on your car. I would hope that this audience knows what I'm referring to here in terms of the quantity of data that these companies are dealing with, these pipeline solutions. And this is not easy. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has finished my book, and he had me address the British government on data science. I learned that the entire Treasury's data systems are saved on Excel spreadsheets, the nation's finances. There's no pipeline of data. There's no Google BigQuery solution for managing the data flow. So that's the first point, is to have just even a high level awareness of what pipelines mean to a business of managing data. And then when I said dashboards, instead of making PowerPoints and sending them around every quarter, why not just have a dashboard in real time that can be accessed by all of your colleagues in a firm, be it an educational institution, be it a record label or a publisher, so they can see the data in real time. So less retrospective data of here's what happened last quarter, and more real-time data of here's what's happening right now. And to do that, you need to be at least aware of pipelines and dashboards in terms of how we build solutions.
I've got a question I'd like to ask Will, if I may, please, Armin. There's a big inquiry in the UK into music streaming economics.
Yeah.
And I was going to suggest that this might be, certainly for US educators in music and music industry work, that this might be a case study for US students to maybe pick up on, because this is something that could fuse into a lot of the core concerns of the educational community about making their teaching that much more relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to that question that you'd ask of any industry, which is, should you regulate? And if you should, who should regulate? And if you should, how should they regulate?
Right.
And we literally have the Competition and Markets Authority crawling over the British music industry right this minute, looking to see if there's anything that needs to be fixed, and worryingly, if there's anything that needs to be punished. So it's an interesting time for us. And I think for students in America, the question of regulation often falls off the curriculum, and you never really see it being discussed. But now, at least in Britain, a top 3, top 4 market in the world, we literally have real-time regulation. So I hope it can provide a really powerful case study for students, especially looking at the economics of the business.
And this has got even greater relevance within the US as well, because just last week or the week before, David Israelite, who heads up the Music Publishers Association in America, saw a big uplift in the mechanical royalty of music.
That helps tie it together. You have regulated rates, you have the global value of copyright, and you can start to raise questions of, there's dollars coming into the food chain, who gets what slice?
Right.
Back to, you cut the cake and I choose. How do we get a fair division?
Right. How do you get a fair division of music, and how does that fair division also reverberate into the pockets of the creators of it?
Absolutely. I have 1 or 2 more quick questions from the audience here. Let's see. Just putting it in the chat. What core economics concepts do you think all music industry professionals should understand, which we can then ensure that our students are somehow receiving as well?
My head is full of many answers to this question, but that doesn't answer your question. I think if there is one that I always like to think about, is to make you think about incentives. Underneath all of economics is incentives. What are the incentives for people selling their music catalogs right now? Is it age? Is it prospects? Is it valuations? Or maybe it's taxation. Capital gains tax is 20%, higher rate of income tax is 45%. If the multiple's high enough, a rational economic actor would say, I'll cash out my chips now and see 80% of the money, as opposed to watching 45% disappear to the tax man. So I think the one thing I like is incentives, and I'm a huge fan of, not to use the term behavioral economics, but anything that can bring incentives into play when you're studying economics. We're not rational people. We don't have perfect information. We're going to make mistakes. The textbook doesn't teach you that, but you need to think about that. So I would stress the role of incentives.
That's interesting. And I have one last one. Are we now in or heading into an attention recession, as Mark Mulligan of MEIEA has been forecasting for a while?
Well, I think it's clear to me that we're seeing more explicitly the scarcity of attention play out. So I spent many years at Spotify arguing and presenting and justifying the argument that after 70 years of songs breaking on radio and then being sold in the shops, now they break on Spotify and then they move to download stores or radio. That is, radio isn't a first mover, it's a last mover. And once we won that battle, Spotify won that war. Everybody's like, with you, this is how we're going to break new music. But back to something you keep reminding me, Ralph, we're restless souls in this business. It's forever changing. Now it's clear to me and clear to many other people that songs break on TikTok and then go to Spotify. And it's that question of, where does your journey begin? And I think that's where you start to see an attention recession. If kids are spending all of their time on TikTok, they're not spending any of their time on Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube anymore. Another example of that is just, I got to work on Travis Scott's Fortnite performance. Fascinating story. Would love, again, to come back to your organization and present, maybe with the team behind it, what happened there and what's going to be happening this year with Hyperreal, which is really exciting. Another example there, a very immersive experience in a game like Fortnite and very little activity on YouTube afterwards. Now, an attention recession needs to ask the question, if I get involved in a gaming platform, do my fans not need to watch my music video? And that's when you realize just how close to the edge you are now. All of a sudden, you've changed the business all over again. So, yeah, I think we're seeing the scarcity of attention play out. But the key question you've got to ask in music is, where does the conversation begin?
So I've got a question for you, Will, just picking up on what Armin had asked. Discover Weekly was something that was introduced into Spotify and has now become a key weekly feature that really brings in new audiences, new listeners, a new body of fans. Just give us a little bit of insight as to how that really manifested into something of significance.
Well, Discover Weekly was built in 2015, same summer as when Apple Music launched. And I remember you posed this question to me in Singapore, Ralph, and I used a farming analogy from a Scottish farming background. I said, what Discover Weekly does is it picks a handful of seeds that no hand could pick up. That is, the seeds being songs. It throws those seeds or songs further than any human hand could throw. It allows human curators to watch which one of those seeds take root.
Right.
We're dealing with 65,000 songs a day. Coming on Spotify. That's more music that was released in the 1980s in a calendar year.
Wow.
So you need the algorithm to manage a supply-side explosion like that. You need the algorithm to help. In the book, the final chapter of the book is called Big Data, Big Mistakes, making a strong argument to swing the pendulum away from big data and towards common sense. I tell the story very briefly about how Richard Thaler established the success of Discover Weekly.
And Richard Thaler is an economist.
He is a Nobel Prize-winning economist in the University of Chicago. Cold place to go in wintertime, has to be said, even by Scottish standards. And the point being, we had so much data science to explain the success of Discover Weekly, but nobody could prove why Throwback Thursdays failed, why Feel Good Fridays failed, why all these other playlist initiatives failed, but Discover Weekly was a success. And Richard looked at all the evidence I presented him, and within like 2 minutes worked it out. He said, it's because you launched it on a Monday. Monday is a day where people are receptive to new things.
Oh, incredible.
Gym membership, which has no data science, will always be promoted on a Monday. When I go to Kentish Town Tube Station, it's Mondays with people with bright jackets giving out flyers for new products. But that is just a very interesting story for professors, academics, and students to think about, which is for all the big data that we had, not one of our 85 data scientists thought about the relevance of the day of the week, making something a success. And it's true to this day. The reason why Discover Weekly changed media forever, 40 million people getting 40 million unique playlists, radio is over, was because it was launched on a Monday.
Well, so obviously one of the focuses that we have is that this business has always been about what's coming next. What's next in store for educators to be able to train, educate, stimulate the students of today for the music of tomorrow and the industry of the next 5 to 10 years?
What I would say for this last question here, and back to you, Armin, is simply to make sure that the university, and I think I may be at risk of repeating myself, is not caught in its own cul-de-sac. There's one college here in Britain called the Academy of Contemporary Music in Guildford. And people used to laugh at it because it actually had an A&R department. I thought it was brilliant. A, you had students. Ed Sheeran was one of their students. And B, you had an A&R department to link those students up with the industry. And their graduate show wasn't on campus. It was in the Shepherd's Bush Empire, where they would force all the label execs and publishing execs down to Shepherd's Bush Empire to see their student intake for that year. And I just love seeing music education being taught like that, with a real reach out to the real world and trying to interact with the world and proactively push what they have, be it music students, be it industry students, into the real world. And credit to New York University and many others, Belmont, if they're on the call, I know you guys do a fantastic job too. But I think it's just, do not allow yourselves to fall back into the safe zone of an echo chamber. Get on the front foot and engage with the business. Armin.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This has been incredibly fascinating. And just to be fair, I did get a very last minute question as well. And maybe you can just kind of quickly speak to this.
Yeah.
And it is really about, let's see, I just had it here. What your thoughts are on DSPs being able to not have their own content? Will all these different DSPs be able to kind of come into one, or is this going to continue where Apple has their own owned content and Spotify and Tidal and so on?
So again, if I was addressing this question from a student in a room in Belmont University in Nashville, what I would be saying is the 2 C's. This is what people overlook. Why can't we do it like Netflix, which is House of Cards, and Disney Plus doesn't have a Cars? Disney Plus has got Star Wars, Netflix doesn't have Star Wars. The first C is charts. Our industry obsesses about charts. Nobody in the video streaming industry says, hey, Ralph, on Monday, my share of streams is down 20%.
Yeah.
Music does. Nobody else says, who's number one this week? Music does. So we obsess about charts, which means we need a Swiss church neutral body to compare each other against. That's unique to music. Second is copyright. So you can try and do an exclusive. I could try and take Taylor Swift exclusive for my service, but with blanket licensing in America by ASCAP and BMI, you can't stop the radio stations from playing it. So that is what makes all streaming services for 20 years and counting charge $9.99 for the same selection of 75 million songs. It's an interesting one. I pay about £60 a month for video streaming content, and I pay £10 a month for music content. 10 years ago, I paid £10 a month and I paid nothing for video streaming. Maybe we're leaving money on the table. But I would love to come back and teach about pricing as well. And to everyone on this call, please get me out to America. I like nothing more than getting to students and helping equip them. So now we're back in real life. I'd love to come and help some of your institutions with your lectures and your curriculums.
Can I also just say that Will has obviously, as always, comes up with really great stimulating triggers to trigger our interest and professional interest. But of course, he also hasn't had a chance to just say that it took the hours and the months it took for him to write Tarzan Economics, a deep, deep amount of thought, but that book has had great ripples all around the world and has also brought forth a whole range of new ideas that you're going to use for your next book you'll be following up sometime next year.
You just decided I'm doing a sequel.
You're doing a sequel. That's right. Better than the prequel.
Well, you're the biggest mentor I've got, Ralph, so I'll take that as my marching order.
Very good.
Absolutely. The book is great reading for faculty and students, and we've shared the link, and it's all obviously, of course, also on the MEIEA website and on the schedule. So I look forward to continuing this conversation with you gentlemen. It's been really fascinating. I really appreciate your time and the dedication and the research that you've presented us today. Hopefully, like I said, we can continue on in the fall, and I look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas next March, because we got to do this in person as we really had intended to. So thank you again. And again, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your organization.
Thank you.